Now, what happens usually when someone dies? As far as the law is concerned, what's the first thing that happens then?
Okay, so is this if he has a will or if he doesn't have a
No,
will?
regardless.
Well, once okay, if someone just drops dead on the street,
Yes.
okay, the coroner will either do an or so an ambulance will come and pick you up, take you to the hospital. You're pronounced dead. If you haven't seen a doctor within the last 3 months, you'll go to the coroner, and the coroner will more than likely do an autopsy on your body to determine the cause of death. Okay, now by that time, the police would have notified the next of kin, and
Okay.
and and the family would know. The family ought to know if there is a will or there isn't a will.
Okay. Now, if there's no will, what happens then?
If, if there's no will, the term for dying without a will is you have died intestate. So intestate, that term means you've died without a will. So that means that a member of the family, and it can be anybody, has to apply to the Supreme Court of whatever state you're in and apply for what they call letters of administration. All right. So they've got to apply to the court and convince the court that they should be the people that are allowed to determine your affairs and to just distribute your assets as they believe you would want them distributed. So that's why it is much better to make a will and have a will than have someone guess what you want,
Then,
because in 90% of the cases, when they've got a guess, they will probably get it wrong.
okay. In the meantime, who pays your mortgage, for example? What does the bank do in that situation?
Well, okay, if you don't have a will and no one has told the bank that you've passed away, the bank are going to assume that you're still alive. So they will still keep the account active, and eventually your mortgage will go into arrears, and the bank will start some sort of collection or action against you. Okay, so
Okay.
that is why someone needs to apply for letters of administration, so they become your spokesperson, so to speak, with the court approval, so they can go to the bank and say, "Look, so and so has passed away. Here are my letters of administration from the Supreme Court. I can now take over and sort out either any of the repayments or put the house on the market to repay the bank what's outstanding, and then to distribute the balance to beneficiaries."
Okay, thank you. Let's just last question here so that we can understand this whole process. Like me, for example, I'm a single guy. I have my house. What if something was to happen to me? Who's gonna come and open my door? Who has the keys to that door? Is what happens then? Who goes to the bank and let them know that this guy, Vince, is not alive anymore?
Well, as I say, if you don't, if this happens to you and you just drop dead at home,
Yeah.
at a point in time, someone is going to come looking for you for whatever reason. Now
Yes.
that reason may be that there's a bad smell coming from your house because
Okay.
no one's realised you've died.
Okay.
Okay, so the police will do what they call a welfare check. They find you dead on the floor. They call the coroner's van. The coroner will come and pick you up and take you away. They will identify you. They'll go through your wallet. They'll go through whatever's in the house that identifies you, and they will look for and try to determine a next of kin.
Okay.
Okay, so when they find a next of kin, uh, and in your case, they might find your son's name and address, and so they'll go around there, and then they will find his mother, and
Okay.
so they won't tell your son because of his age why they're there, but they'll ask to speak to his mother, and they will get her aside, and they will say, "I'm sorry to have to inform you, but we've just found Vince deceased at home. Um, and we're sorry to pass on the bad news." And that sort of then becomes her responsibility, if she wants it, to
Really?
either, well, if she wants it, to either do something about it or to notify somebody else in your family so
Ah,
that
okay.
they do something about it. She's not duty bound to do anything with it because she doesn't have to. But you would like to think that she would let someone in your family know that you passed away, and then it would be up to someone in your family to go to apply for letters of administration because you don't have a will. Now,
Okay.
everything I've described to you is circumvented, is taken away, is stopped from happening if you have a will.
Okay, if I don't have a will now, and then my I only have one son, how long? I mean, what has got to do to get all my assets?
I'm sorry, can you say that again,
I
please,
said, I don't
Richard?
have, let's say I don't have a will, right? I don't have one kid, only my son. What has
Yeah.
he got to do to take possession of all my assets? Which
Well,
I imagine that
well, he can't. He's only 13. He's 13, isn't he?
it's 12. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
he's 12, so he can't go and bring an action in court to be the administrator. So it's got to be someone that's over 18. It has to be an adult. So it would need to be another member of your family that would go and apply for letters of administration
but I
on the
don't have anyone.
ground.
Let's say I live here, so I don't have anyone else.
Well, then there's an expectation that his mother would do it for him.
Okay, so it's a whole procedure for him to take ownership of all my assets. Is that what you're saying?
But well, unless someone helps him do it, it's not going to happen by magic.
Oh, okay.
So someone has to help him do it if he's a child. If we're talking about someone that's 13, we need someone that is at least over 18 to go and apply for letters of administration on your behalf to the Supreme Court of the ACT.
Oh, thank you very much. So that's
Can I jump?
hence. No, no. We have. Aaron, sorry, Aaron. Sorry, we're going to go to a spot where you have questions to ask him in a minute. In the meantime, continue. Now, you talked about the executive will earlier. That leads me to this question: who makes sure your wishes are carried away?
Okay, are we talking about someone that has a will or
No,
someone that
okay.
doesn't?
That's someone who has a will.
Okay, someone who has a will nominate an executor of the
Okay,
will. Now, the role of the executor is to make sure that the wishes of the deceased are carried out in exactly the order in which is detailed in the will.
okay.
All right.
Thank
Now,
you.
the executor. So the first thing the executor does, the executor can't act until they have in their hand the original copy of the death certificate.
Okay,
So once they have the death certificate, they then approach the Supreme Court and apply for probate.
okay. Thank you very much, Frank. Now we have the last two questions before we people can ask you questions. We move to Q&E. Now, where should you keep your will, and how can the solicitor help?
Okay, you. My view is if your solicitor has written your will, then you should keep it. You should keep the original with your solicitor
Mhm.
and let your executor know who your solicitor is. That's number one. The second choice is if you don't want to leave it with your solicitor, then you leave it with the executor. So the
Okay,
person that you've nominated as the executor, you
okay.
leave them with the original.
Okay, thank you very much for your insights about this topic. Now, if anyone has a question, Irene lives in Sydney, France. She's been in Australia for 14 years,
Yes.
and she's got a question for you. Go ahead,
Yeah,
ma'am.
thank you so much for sharing your insights. This is very interesting.
Mhm.
I just
You're most
want to
welcome.
clarify earlier around the guardianship. So if I have underage kids, when
Yes.
I have a will or otherwise, I need to nominate, someone who is over 18 in order
Yes.
to look after the asset until they turn 18. I was just wondering, can that guardian then, I guess, use those assets to look after?
They can. So normally when you have that paragraph in there, there's a bit in there that gives the guardian permission to liquidate, or gives the executor of the will permission to liquidate enough money for the guardian to be able to educate and keep the child.
Okay. All right. And
So,
the executor and the guardian can be two different people.
well, a guardian should only be one person.
That's right.
However, there's no reason why you can't have two if the guardian are husband and wife.
Yeah.
If the guardians are husband and wife, then you would nominate both of them. If the guardian is a single person, then you wouldn't nominate two single people as a guardian, because presumably you don't want to. You're talking about more than one child. Presumably you want to keep your children together
Mhm.
under the one roof with the same set of guardians or the same single guardian.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Makes sense. Yeah. Thank
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay, guys, any other question? Please ask away. Frank is here to answer all the questions we have regarding this topic.
I'll add a few other things that might generate some comment. So also in a will, you would articulate how you wanted your body disposed of. So whether you were an organ donor, whether you wanted your body donated to science, whether you wanted to be buried or cremated. If you have pets, you may say, for argument's sake, if it was my will and I had a dog and I wanted someone to look after the dog when I died, I would nominate, say, Vince in my will. I'd nominate. I would direct that Vince is given $20,000 to look after my dog until the day it dies. All right, so Vince gets 20 grand to feed, care for, and look after the dog out of my asset, out of my estate.
Okay.
Okay, so that's that's something else that you would take care of. So with a will, when somebody dies, the role of the executor, as I say, is to carry out the wishes of the person that's died. Now that generally means bringing all the deceased person's assets together, and in some cases liquidating them. Now, you would liquidate shares. So if the person that's died has a share portfolio, you would liquidate that and turn that into cash. Because one of the first things that the executor does is he opens up a bank account and let's just say it's Vince's will that we're talking about, and Vince passes away. Touch wood, it doesn't happen. It would be the account would be titled the estate of Vince Domo. Okay, so everything that's liquidated goes into that account, into the estate of Vince. Now, if Vince had a house and the house needed to be sold to be split up, then the sale of that house would go into that same bank account. So it goes into the same pot. So the job of the executor is to make sure that all of Vince's liabilities are settled and that the distribution of his assets it done so in accordance with his will.
But that means,
Now,
Frank.
when I say liabilities, it may be if Vince has got a tax debt, because you have to notify the tax office of someone's death. That's part of the executor's role. They may say Vince had an outstanding tax bill of 10 grand. Well, I'd be obliged to pay that.
So what you say that being an executor is a big responsibility then. So you have to
It,
basically ask someone to, yeah.
it is. And a lot of people who are made executors. So it would be very unfair to make someone your executor without asking them first, to make sure that they're capable and able to do it. But it's also not uncommon to have an executor go to a solicitor and say, "This is too hard for me. Can you do it?" So that happens a lot. I get a lot of executors come to me and say, "Frank, I don't have the time. This is too hard. Can you do it?" And so then I just take over as the executor. I make sure the executor signs everything off, but I do the work and then I charge the executor and it comes out of the estate. Now, one question that is normally asked when we talk about wills is what happens if there's a fight over the will? Who pays
Okay.
the legal fee? Who pays the legal fees for the fight? So let's just say I pass away and I've left someone out of the will who believes that they should be in it. So they contest the words that is used is contest. They contest the will. So who pays for that? So in theory, the cost of that person contesting, provided the judge deems that it is a reasonable request that they're asking, then that'll be paid out of the estate. They won't have to pay it themselves. But if it is someone that's just made up an absolute rubbish claim from nowhere, who has nothing to do with the person that's died and is just trying to get a few easy bucks, the judge will make them pay their own legal fees.
Okay, Frank. What happened to? I mean, sometimes people have kids out of the wedlock. Can those kids contest the will if the names are not in the will?
Happens all the time. Like the family of Visiboard. I don't know whether you're familiar with it, but it's the Pratt family, huge family. Um, uh, the father had an extramarital affair with a model. He had a daughter to her, and he died. He left something to the mother, and he left something to the daughter. and that's 15, 20 years ago. Now that family is worth billions of dollars, and that daughter has now gone back to court and said, I'm a child, the father is my father, I need to be part of that trust. Now that trust is worth billions of dollars. So there's a big argument in the Victorian Supreme Court at the moment the question is should she be allowed to be a trustee because her father was the head of the company, and my view is she will probably come in as a trustee, and overnight she'll become a billionaire.
Okay.
It happens quite regularly.
Okay, thank you guys. Any other questions, please? Okay, go ahead, le Mexicain. Eric, go ahead, please. Okay.
Yeah, please. Okay. Did you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear
Yes.
you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Good night, Frank. Thank you
Mhm.
very much for the advice and everything. My question will be in two. It's like if I don't have a will, I have a kid here in Australia, and then I have a kid in another country or maybe in Africa, and
Yes.
maybe I passed away. What about? Is it the government going to take in count the kid that I have in Africa and the one that I have here? And the other question will be, if now I have a will, I mentioned the one in Africa, and then I mentioned the kid that I have here. Is it the government going to take in count those kids also?
Well, the government really has no interest in your will unless you owe the tax office money. So in terms of your children, the government's really got no interest in your children. I know that sounds harsh, but the government aren't interested in your children. They're only interested in any outstanding tax that you might have to pay. So they'll deal with that. It's up to you to deal with your children by way of guardianship. Now, it is very difficult with if you have children in another country because the rules that apply here in relation to guardianship may not apply to the country in which the child lives in. So the advice that I would give someone if they were asking me now that is I would be seeking advice from a solicitor in the country where the child is, or making contact with the child's mother and asking her what she has done, if in fact she's done anything about it. And if she hasn't, then I would speak to the solicitor in the country where the child is and do whatever it is that you need to do to cover that child in terms of any assets that you might have over in that country. It's really only going to become valid if you have assets in the country where the child is and you want to leave those assets to that child. Because in terms of guardianship, the mother's there anyway, so she is the guardian. So you don't need to worry about guardianship of that child in another country. You would only be looking at the possibility of guardianship of the child in Australia.
Okay, guys, two more questions, and we let Frank go and hit his bed because it's getting late. Guys, any more? Okay, go ahead, Ivan. Ivan lives in Sydney, Frank. Go ahead, Ivan.
Hi, John. Frank, sorry, and thank you for joining us tonight.
My
My
pleasure.
question is around let's say I write a will in Australia. I'm not sure you have answered that. Will it be recognized in Cameroon? And let's say, for example, I give my mother the main beneficiary of the will. How would that work? And the third question would be, how will it work if I have a trust? Thank you.
Okay, so let me get this right. You're in Australia, your mother's in Cameroon, but you have an Australian will leaving assets. Are the assets in Australia or are the assets in Cameroon?
Both.
Okay, you would need to do a will in both countries. So you would need to do a will in Australia that would leave your assets to your mother here in Australia, and you would need to do a will in Cameroon because I'm almost positive that the rules around estates will be different. It'll be a different set of rules. So I really can't advise you on what to do in Cameroon other than to speak to a solicitor over there and find out what the rules are and get a will drawn up over there, the same as what you would do here. It will be different in what ways I really don't know because I haven't looked at it. But that is generally what happens. And I have I've got a number of clients where they have assets in other countries and children in other countries, and that's what I generally do. Sometimes I'll ring the lawyer myself and I'll find a lawyer for them in their country and get them to organise what needs to be done. But so in a nutshell, your will in Australia cannot will have no effect on your assets to your mother in Cameroon. It will only have effect on the assets to your mother that the assets that you hold in Australia.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys. One more question. Oh, Irene, I'm sure you have another question. Come on, go ahead.
Sorry, Vincent, I had a question,
Okay.
but it has
Oh,
nothing to do with the will.
okay, no, later on. We don't talk. We talk later on. See if Frank has some time. You can talk. You can ask a question. Now, Irene, do you have a question about the topic?
Before we joined the call, we were actually just talking with Vincent about if you had assets in multiple countries. But I think you've just answered that, Frank. So essentially, you need to draw wills in each country where you have assets. That's what
That's right, because the disposal of those assets in each country is going to have a different tax implication in that country. So that's why you can't deal with assets from overseas. But and we'll talk about this another time. Another topic that I've said to Vince that we'll talk about is divorce and division of property and children's plans. So when a couple break up, what happens when you get divorced? Okay, because I find in a lot of cases the same question comes up there because there's assets in multiple countries. So that's probably going to be. I'll be able to. I think I've answered your question anyway.
Okay,
But,
okay, okay, Frank.
we'll be able to go in and talk about it a little bit more next time when we talk about something else.
Okay, Frank. What we can do, because we have the opportunity to have you on our program. What you have 3 more minutes before we can let you go. If someone has a question, any question about any topic, please, you can have a brief answer, and you guys go ahead. Paulin,
So
vas-y.
now's the time if you've got a question about anything other than wills.
Yes, for the next 5 minutes, and that's it. Paulin?
Okay, thank you very much, Vince. Thank you very much for all your contributions this afternoon.
Mhm.
And my question has to do with the contract. Are you a contract solicitor?
Well, it depends on what you're going to ask me. Yes, I do contracts, but there's contracts for many different types of things.
Now, I'm looking for. I signed a contract with a company in India to deliver software for me, and could not deliver what was signed in the contract. And now, even what they bill, they bring that down because I refused to pay the last the last money, who was the 1/5 of what's supposed to be paid. And so, yeah, I'm looking for how I can claim that money from them.
In India, the recourse if something goes wrong is very, very difficult because your contract that you would have signed, I've got no doubt, says that any contractual dispute is covered under Indian law and not under Australian law, unless your lawyer wrote the contract and had it under Australian law. If your lawyer wrote the contract that you signed for the product in Australia and it's covered under Australian law, then you might have a chance of getting it back because you can start a case here. But if it's under Indian law, you would need to engage a lawyer in India, and you've got to make a business decision. Is it worth spending the money that the lawyer is going to cost you on what you're trying to chase?
Okay, thank you, guy. Another question, please. Serge, I'm sure you have a question. Burning your lips.
I would firstly like to thank our lawyer
Frank?
today to
Yeah.
take the time to explain to us things that we actually seeking as knowledge.
Mhm.
Recently, I have just came back from Cameroon, where I spent a few months on holiday. On my arrival, I actually declare on the arrival car that I have some goods coming from home, and I was then sent off to the area where I get searched, and
Yep.
I did remove the items on from my bags, and those items are the regular goods that I always brought abroad, and I was told that I was not allowed to bring them. And when I asked what was the reason behind that, they said it was prohibited in Australia, and that it was not well packaged. and that I failed to declare. Uh, I said, I asked the officers, then why am I doing in front of you if I failed to declare? I ticking the box, and beside of this, they gave me a fine of $1,980 for after confiscating my goods. So this has caused me a lot of distress since then. I wrote.
What were the goods?
It was a dry food, traditional dry food, which is nuts. We have nuts in the we also got honey. We got some of the good that we call Johnson.
Yeah, but go ahead, please. Frank has to go research.
Okay, so
Go straight to the point because
I've
it's.
got.
I need to explain. I need to explain for him to understand what is going on.
Yeah, but be brief because we have to go.
I understand, and I know why they find you, because nuts and fruits and all that are on the declaration card. So foods are on the declaration card, and if you haven't ticked the box that you've got these things, and they pull you in for a search, and all of a sudden they find them, then you have failed to declare it.
No,
because you haven't.
Sorry to cut you off. Sorry, sir, to cut you off. Actually, it was ticked because it was in the part of the nut. There was a grain, nut, and all those items are ticked too. The other part was if I'm coming from Africa, which are also ticked. So.
Well, that doesn't I can't explain it. That doesn't make sense to me. That if you've ticked it and you've declared it, and if it is a prohibited item, what they would normally do is just take it off you and throw it in the bin and then let you go and not fine you. So I find it very unusual that they fined you, that they gave you that fine, particularly of that amount. That's a pretty high fine. For anything that I've heard of recently, if you say that you've ticked the box, the incoming box, that this is what I'm bringing in, and they still fine you, then something's gone wrong somewhere.
Answer, Frank. We have all learned a lot from you tonight. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to having you. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having you again on our platform to talk about other topics. Thank you.
That's my pleasure. And Vince, can I just say, if
Yes.
if any of the people that are listening tonight, if they have an issue that they want to discuss further, then
Yes.
then you have my permission to give them my mobile number.
Okay, thank you very much. That's great.
I appreciate that, Frank. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you guys. Good night, Frank, and see you soon.
Yep.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Take care.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Mais Ben, je ne suis pas fier de toi. Hein.
Thank you very much, Frank.
C'est pas fier de moi, comment? Hein?
D'un sujet sensible comme ça, tu ne laisses pas le gars parler. C'est quoi avec toi?
Non, mais